Hello and welcome to Nithrania YouTube channel. You're watching another video from the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec, and in this video we're going to learn how to play the Gutenberg game from Grana Studio in Poland. To set the game up, first choose the correct side of the game board. This is the side for a 2-player game, and this one for a 3 and a 4-player game. In this video, I will show you how to set the game up for 3 players. Sort all the cards by their type and shuffle each stack separately. And in a 2-player game, draw 6 printing cards and 6 refinement cards and place them face up somewhere next to the game board. In a 3-player game, draw 8 cards from each stack. And in a 4-player game, draw 10 cards from each stack. As I said, I will set the game up for 3 players. So we will only need 8 cards from the stacks. Then draw as many printing cards as there are players in the game and place them face up on these spaces. And do the same with the refinement cards. So in a 4-player game, all spaces with this symbol will remain empty for the rest of the game. Shuffle the deck of specialty cards and again place 1 card on each space face up. Take all the ink tokens and put them into the bag. Then for each ink space on the game board, place 1 random ink token on that space. Again, leave these spaces empty in a 4-player game. Shuffle all the gears, and for each space, for each player in the game, draw and place 1 of those gears face up. In a 2-player game only, first remove all the gears with these white lines from the game. Only use the gears with these gray lines, these separation lines. And only then create the draw pile, shuffle it and place the gears on the game board. Finally, shuffle these Patronage cards and fill in all the relevant spaces in this area of the game board. So this is how it looks like in a 3-player game. Then place this round marker on the first space on the round track. Create the general supply of coins and types. They are all meant to be unlimited. Place all the remaining cards and the gears near the game board and leave some space for the discard piles. Then each player chooses a color and takes 1 printing house board, 1 initiative board, 1 player screen, 4 player markers which are placed in the starting spaces of these specialty tracks, additional 4 player markers which are placed next to the player board, 1 disc which is placed in the first space of the reward track, additional disc which is placed on the first space of the scoring track, and 10 coins. Now randomly determine the starting player who will take this first player token, and 7 initiative markers. Then the next player in a clockwise direction receives 8 initiative markers, then the third player receives 9 and 4th player would receive 10. Now this player order will be important for selecting the starting orders. In this player order, starting with the first player, each player chooses 1 printing card and 1 refinement card. You can choose any cards from the display and place these 2 cards as 1 order next to your player board in one of these 4 order slots. And from now on, this is 1 fixed order, you can never separate these cards. Then the next player in a player order also chooses 1 combination, and then the last player. After that, repeat the same process, but this time going from the last player back to the first player. So here again it's white player choosing 1 printing card and 1 refinement card, then the blue player, and finally the red player again. Now take the remaining cards from the display and place them in their respective discard piles. By the way, these pieces don't come with the game, I only use them for the demonstration. So now each player should have 2 starting orders, and finally each player may choose 3 types, any 3 types from the general supply, ideally those that are needed to complete their orders. For the first game, the authors recommend to play the game without the character tiles. If you decide to play with those tiles, draw 2 tiles at random, choose 1 of those tiles, place it in the designated space, and return the other back to the box. You can find a description of all these effects at the back of the rulebook. In Gutenberg, players are one of the printing pioneers in the industry, and over the course of the game you will acquire orders and you will try to fulfill those orders, for which you get coins and these fame points, which are essentially the victory points. You will also increase the specialties of your printing house, for which you can also score fame points at the end of the game. And you may also gain support from these powerful patrons, which also provide additional fame points at the end of the game. The game is played over 6 rounds, and each round has 5 phases. In the first phase, you will rotate the gears on your player board. In the first round of the game, you don't have any gears. Later in the game, you will simply rotate the first gear one section clockwise. Then in the second phase, players will plan their actions, and they do it behind their player screens. During this phase, you will place these initiative markers on your initiative board. When all players are done, they will reveal their player screens and proceed to the phase 3, in which players execute those plans, which means they perform actions on the game board. The first action is shown at the top of the game board. Players will take orders. During the second action, players will take inks. During the third one, you will take specialties. In the fourth action, you will take additional gears. And the fifth action is gaining support from the patrons. In the fourth phase, if you meet the requirements, you can fulfill orders. And the fifth phase is the preparation for the next round. The game ends at the end of round 6. And the player with the most victory points, with the most fame, wins the game. Again, you gain the fame for fulfilling orders, for increasing your specialties, and from acquiring these patrons. So the first phase is turning your gears. In the first round of the game, this phase is skipped because you don't have any gears yet. In subsequent rounds, turn the top wheel one section clockwise. Each gear has 3 sections, one of them is aligned against this arc, so simply rotate the gear one section clockwise. In the second phase, players will plan their actions using the initiative markers on this initiative board. Those 5 actions correspond to the actions on the game board. Here, it's taking orders, taking inks, increasing your specialty, improving printing house, and gaining the patronage. Players perform this phase behind their player screens, and you may rearrange those initiative markers any way you want. The more cubes to allocate to each action, the higher the chance you will act first. If you don't allocate any cubes to an action, you will not be able to perform that action at all. Then, when all players are done, remove the player screens, and then all those actions are resolved in the sequence from top to bottom. So first, all players will perform the action of taking the orders, which is the first action on the game board. Then all players will perform the second action, which is taking inks. Then they will perform the third action, and so on. The player order for each of those actions is determined by the number of initiative markers for that action. The player with the most markers for that action goes first, the player with the second most markers goes second, and so on. Ties are resolved by the turn order. So here, for the first action, for taking the orders, red player has 2 markers, blue player only 1, and white player has 2 markers as well. Since both red and white have the most markers, the red player will act first because that player is first in this turn order. So the first action will be performed by red player first, then white player, and then blue player. The second action, taking inks, will be performed first by the blue player because they have 2 markers here, and then again by red player and white player. The third action, taking the specialties, will be first performed by the white player because that player has 4 markers here, then blue player, and then red. Finally, to perform an action, you must have at least 1 initiative marker for that action, so this fourth action will be first taken by the red player, then by the white player, but blue player will not take that action at all. Going first for each of those actions is an advantage because the player has more options and after taking that action, other players now have limited options. So now that we know in which order players will perform actions on the game board, it's time to explain all those actions. The first action is the Take Orders action. On your turn, you choose one of the printing cards and one of the refinement cards, and take those cards and place them next to your player board in one of the open slots. The combination of the cards is fixed permanently, those cards are linked together and they form one order. The printing cards represent the black text in your printings, in your books, and the refinement cards represent various enhancements to that printing, like colored ink, leather binding, illumination and ornaments, special fonts, and others. For fulfilling the basic requirement for the base black text, you get paid, you get coins, and for all those refinements, you get fame points or the victory points. At any time during the game, you can have maximum 4 orders, and if all those slots would be occupied and you would gain another order, first you have to discard one of those orders to take the new one. Now, after you take those cards from the game board, don't refill those empty spaces. Other players in the player order will have limited options. At the end of the action, if there are still any cards left on the game board, discard those cards. With the second action, you can take inks. On your turn, you can always take just one set of inks and you always have to choose from left to right. You can take 1, 2, or all 3 of them. When you take the first one, it's for free. When you take the second one, you have to pay 1 coin. And when you take the third one, you would have to pay 2 coins. You have to take them in this order. You are not allowed to take the first one, then, for example, skip the second one and take the third. You always have to take them in the order. Place those inks somewhere next to your player board. Again, don't refill those empty spaces. The next player can again choose one of the sets, and it can be the complete set, taking the inks from left to right, or even the incomplete set, but again, only one set. So here the next player can pay 2 coins and simply take the blue ink. If the player would do that, they would not be able to choose another ink from another set. At the end of the action, when all players are done, if there are any inks remaining on the game board, take those inks and return them back to the bag. With the third action, you can choose one of the specialty cards. When you do, take the card and for each symbol, increase the corresponding specialty level by 1. Here it would also be 1 level for the typesetting. Then you can discard the card. Now, instead of moving 1 level up for each of those symbols, you have the second option, and that's moving any of your specialties just 1 level up. It doesn't have to be the specialty shown on the card. This is obviously less optimal, but sometimes it's really needed. When advancing on the specialty tracks, when you first time reach level 2 on any of those tracks, move your marker on the reward track 1 space forward as indicated by this symbol and take the reward shown under that space immediately. Here you can choose any ink from the bag, you can look inside and choose the one you need, but you are only limited to those inks in the bag. If the ink you want is not in the bag, well, you have to choose another one. These rewards are one-time rewards, so if you reach the second level on another track, nothing happens, you don't get that reward again. Similarly, when you reach the level 4 on any of your tracks, move the marker to the next space on the reward track and again take the bonus. When you get to the 5th level, you can take 1 new order. To do that, draw 2 printing cards and 2 refinement cards and choose 1 card from each stack. And if you wouldn't be happy with the options, you can pay 2 coins and draw 2 more cards. They can be 1 from each stack, but you can also draw 2 cards from the same stack. But only draw 2. You can repeat this as many times as you want, as long as you can pay those 2 coins. Then place the selected order in one of your empty slots. And finally, when you reach level 6 on any of your tracks, move your marker to the last space of the reward track and take 1 type for free. you can choose any type from the general supply. If later in the game you would be able to move that marker again, leave that marker in its space and gain 3 coins instead. Then again, if there are any cards remaining on the game board at the end of the action, discard those cards. Then with the 4th action, you may improve your printing houses by taking one of the gears. Place it in the topmost empty space on your player board and place it in such a way that you align the section with this arc. You may choose any of those sections to be the active section. If you would already have all 3 gears on your player board and you take the new one, you may decide to uninstall one of those gears, but only if it was not used this turn yet, which means it doesn't have this cube. After uninstalling the old one, you can install the new one. And the 3rd option, instead of taking one of the gears from the game board, is to uninstalling and reinstalling the same gear into the same space, but with a different active section. So, for example, something like this. It's useful when you want to use the new effect instead of the previous active. Again, you can only do that if that gear was not used this turn yet. To use the gear, take one of your markers and place it on the gear. You can only place it on the active section which is aligned with the arc, and then perform the effect of that section. You can find a description of all those effects at the back of the rulebook. This means you can use each of your gears only once per round. So again, if at the end of the action there are any gears remaining on the game board, discard those gears. The 5th action is the Patronage action. With this action you have 2 options. You can either choose one of the rewards from this space or take one card. However, taking cards is only available starting with the round 3. In the round 1 and 2, you can only take one of the rewards. When you take one of those rewards, place one of your cubes, one of your markers on that reward and take that reward. Here, you take one new order. Here, you can choose one of those 4 specialties and increase that specialty by 1 level. And note, this is one action, which means other players may not take another specialty as a reward. The 3rd reward is simply taking 3 coins, and 4th one taking any 2 inks from the back. You may only take an action which is not occupied yet, so the next player may only choose one of the remaining actions. Starting with the round 3, you have a 2nd option to take the card. You can only take the card which is from the same round or from any previous rounds. To take the card, you must fulfill all the requirements on that card. For this card, for example, your typesetting specialty must be at least on the level 3 and elimination level on level 4. To meet this requirement, you have to have those inks in your supply and you have to discard those inks, put them back into the bag. To meet this requirement, you have to have these types in your personal supply, but you don't have to discard them, you just have to have them. So when you meet the requirement, simply take the card, place it somewhere next to your game board into your personal supply. You will score that card at the end of the game. In the 4th phase, you may fulfill orders. You do this starting with the 1st player and continuing clockwise. You can fulfill as many orders as you want. To fulfill the order, you need the corresponding types in your reserve. These are mandatory to fulfill the order. Optionally, you may also use inks, and if you meet the requirements for the specialty levels, you gain additional rewards. At any time during the game, you can buy additional types, and the price for buying the types is 1 more than the number of types you already have. So here we have 4 types. We're going to buy the 5th one, which is going to cost 5 coins. So let's say we buy this I type. In order to fulfill both of these orders, I need additional O. That's going to be the 6th type, which is going to cost 6 coins. You can choose any type from the general supply. Then, when fulfilling order, it's a good habit to take those types and place them on the corresponding spaces on those orders. That way, you may only use one type on one order only. You may not use the same type on other orders during the same fulfillment. However, those types are never lost. They will remain with you for the rest of the game. Using inks is optional. If I want to use the ink, I place it on the corresponding spaces on those orders. And with specialty levels, you just need to compare the requirements with your current level. Now, when you fulfill the order, for these basic requirements, you get paid. So here, you would gain 2 coins. When you meet the inks requirements, you get additional reward shown under those inks. So here it's 4 fame points or victory points. And if you also have the required specialty levels, you get additional reward. And if you gain both rewards at the same time, you also get this big reward, this bonus. So in this example, you would gain 4 plus 2, 6 victory points. And you can choose 1 ink from the bag. After that, move the types back to your supply. Inks are returned back to the bag. And the order cards are discarded to the corresponding discard piles. In this example, for fulfilling the basic requirements, you would get 5 coins. For having the specialty level, you would get 1 victory point. However, for not having this blue ink, you would not gain these 2 victory points. And that means you would not have both of these requirements completed, which means you don't score these 2 additional victory points neither. So you only get 5 coins and 1 victory point. When you're done fulfilling the orders, the next player in a player order can fulfill their orders, and once all players are done, proceed to the phase 5. In the 5th phase, prepare the game board for the next round in the same way you do it during the setup, and in case any of the draw decks run out, reshuffle the discard pile and create the new draw deck. Then move the marker to the next round, recollect all your markers from these bonus spaces and also from the gears on your player board. Take back all your initiative markers and move the first player marker to the next player clockwise. Now, every player takes one of the cubes and gives that initiative cube to the player who just moved that first player token. With that, you will have the same distribution of initiative markers. The first player will have 7 initiative markers, the second player would have 8, third player would have 9, and potentially the fourth player would have 10. Then proceed to the next round. The game ends at the end of round 6. In addition to the victory points you scored during the game, you gain additional victory points based on this table. You get victory points for the levels of your specialties, for your patrons, and for the coins. For each track where you reach the level 6, you score 6 victory points. For level 5, you score 3 victory points, and for level 4, you would score 1. Then you score 1 victory point for every 3 coins in your personal reserve, and 8 points for each of your patrons. Then the player with the most points is the winner. So that's how you play Gutenberg. If you would have any questions or comments, please put them into the comment sections below. I'll be more than happy to answer as many as I can. If you like the series, please subscribe. You can even support the channel on the Patreon page. My name is Branislav Berec. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell and hope to see you next time. I would like to thank everyone who has ever supported the channel, and especially the current supporters listed on this page. If you too would like to support the channel in creation of videos like this and other video tutorials and other content on this channel, please visit the patreon.com/Nithrania.